My guest today is the great Professor Ludwig Holtmeier, who is a music theorist, musicologist, pianist, and the president of the Hochschule for Musik Freiburg. Professor Holtmeier, it's a real thrill to have you on the program.
Thank you, Nikhil. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, let me get a bit of your background. Could you describe your musical education and training? What was your path that led you to where you are today?
Well, I was starting as playing piano and coming from a music-loving family. I grew up in Bielefeld, was in Westphalia, not too far away from Hanover, if you get an idea where it's located. So I was playing piano in a very young age, and I'm playing clarinet too. And well, I was then, as I proved to be apparently quite gifted and quite eager to progress in this instrument, I then became what we called a young student. A very young student at the age of 15. I was then in the Musik Academy in Detmold and came studying there, doing my piano. And then afterwards, well, what I had to do after school, after I did my gymnasium, as we say, if we do matura, I had to do my military service, well, really, which I did as a clarinetist in a band, which was quite it was Air Force band, which was quite haute volée. So we traveled quite a lot, which was and it was fantastic. I had a room for myself at that time, just a single room. It was incredible because we were these, as you know, it was the upper grades, so there was even a cleaning woman. I mean, it's incredible. We had. And I had the possibility to continue my studies in Detmold at the time. Well, and afterwards, after a year in Detmold, I really had a feeling I had to move away, and I was always looking very much to get into the direction of the French-speaking countries, because I have to say that I come from my mother's side. I come from an Alsatian background. I mean, my grandmother was born in Hagenau, so there was always. My mother was a French teacher, of course. So so I went to Geneva, where I found perhaps one of the two most important teachers of my life, Edoardo Vercelli, who was, you may know, one of the really great Argentinian pianist who taught me that kind of scaramuzza technique, which I did not know before. And that was an important thing. When I stopped my piano studies, I did what they call the soloist examination, the virtuosité, in Geneva and later in Neuchâtel. And at the same time, I was already living with my future wife then in Freiburg. So I was then traveling from Geneva and still moved to Freiburg at a certain time, where I began doing where I met my second grade teacher, which was Ecamm, who was a teacher of quite a lot of important music theory, German music theorists. I mean, he was the teacher of Johannes Menke too, as you may know.
Can I actually jump in and ask you a quick question before we progress to your further education? Did you have a typical classical training, a very normal one in the 20th century? I wanted to ask you, did you ever improvise as a youngster?
Yeah, I did. I did my improvisation, and I did quite a lot of, quite different kind, which was more a classical kind in composition too. But certainly I never had that kind of improvisation, that we do with our students today. I was far away, even from the training at a time, from the music theory training. It was completely different. The only difference were the organ players, but I did not have at that time contact with those musicians.
I wanted to ask if you also have perfect or absolute pitch.
No absolute pitch. No perfect, but I tried to train in from the beginning.
Would you also learn music theory and counterpoint as a young musician?
Yes, I did, in a quite very strict German way at that time. That means the Fuchs, the species, but in a very strict sense, very early, far away from, and very strong, as you know, this very strong tradition of Riemannian, or we should say Grabner, German functional theory.
And I interrupted you. Sorry, you continued on when you moved to Freiburg.
I met then Ecamm, and I did my studies there. After I had the concert exam and the virtuosité, I just did there my studies of musicology, of German literature, of history at the university, musicology too. And of course, the most important, I think, studies then after my instrumental studies were music theory with Ecamm. And then everything went quite fastly. Quite fast. I had the opportunity when I stopped doing my study in music theory at the age of 29, 28, because you see, I had the studies of piano before. I then had the possibility to get as a musicologist at that time, as a musicology, to the Hans Eisler in Berlin, which was my first Hochschule where I taught. The reason was perhaps that in 1997 came one of the perhaps most important events in my life, because we founded the journal Musik Ästhetik with Clyde Cotta, which in some sense made me quite well known overnight. And I have to say, I mean, from that moment on, I really was invited to every position I was postulating for. So it was really funny to do this, and I had a fantastic time at the Hans Eisler, which is just a remarkable school. You have to say, I met quite a lot of fantastic musicians, had some interesting projects and festivals, Berlin School, the Berlin students of Schönberg with Pergamenchikov and others. So it was a great time, but I was there for, let's say, 2 years, and then I was nominated for a full professorship at the age of 33 then at the university, at the Hochschule in Dresden, where there was Clemens Kuhn, and where I had my first Hauptfachklasse, where I had my first class of music theorists, Felix Tiergarten and others, and which was really a great time. And I was there for 3 years, and after those 3 years, I went to Freiburg. Then I had a little stop back because I went for nearly 2 years to the Schola Cantorum in Basel, and then went back to Freiburg.
You've been mentioned as an expert on Partimento. And when did you discover Partimento and the Italian traditions?
Well, it was, I can really tell you when it was exactly. It was in 2003. At that time, I was, just allow me to get a broader view on these things, because when I grew up in this very German tradition, it was very much centered on German functional theory, Riemannian theory, not in a neo-Riemannian sense, but in the very classical sense, which I thought was quite strict. I remembered, for example, a very typical situation with my teacher Ecamm, and he showed me all these signs, and it was getting very complicated. And I said, I said to him, "Well, you see, Eckhart, the problem I do have is that the signs tell me this is very, very complicated. My ears tell me, this is very, very normal. This is just, let's say, it's just a pattern. It's a schemata that I hear." But there was really not a real sense of doing that kind of historical research. And I began doing this kind of research. I mean, it began with the 19th, 20th century. I was looking, where does this kind of German tradition come from? And that was, maybe you have seen this article on the development and functional theory in the Third Reich. I mean, of this background of I wouldn't say it's a Nazi theory, but to say to look at how that some of the very strict elements we kept at the moment, still kept them, have developed in the 30s, 40s at least, very much. And if you see, for example, that the Grabner Musiklehre has been developed at a certain moment, it was conceived at a kind of a Reichsharmonielehre. So that means completely that should be regulated. That is certainly a point. Well, I must admit, if I look at this, what I have written at the time, which is now, let's say, nearly 20 years ago, I mean, I was certainly concentrating very much in my research on these questions, not seeing perhaps quite different tradition that was still vivid. But let's say not in quite a lot of the official training. It certainly was one part, but at least for us, I would say, when we were educated in the 80s, in the 90s, it was still very relevant.
How did you break away then from the Riemannian and this thought of very strict theories?
Well, let's say that there might be something which is not only in the matter as itself, I mean, not only just in the topic, in the theory, in the method, because there's very much fascinating about the method too, you have to see, because it's a very developed system. It's very interesting. But what I did in my analysis of the music in the nationalism and the origins of what we did was that, for example, I was taking one of the most famous and most important publications of the 50s, 60s, even in the 70s and 18. That means the books, the textbooks of Wilhelm Mahler, and for example, in East Germany, it was Paul Schenk. And what I did, I was taking the original publications of the 40s. And I was saying and I was in some sense reconstructing the background where they came from. I mean, with the old Hitler Jugendlieder that were into, which still took a part of it. And then I was only asking these things, not too much polemic. I tried to put not too much polemic into, but I was asking myself, what of these things are we really? What of these questions and what of these traditions do we really need anymore? And shouldn't we be aware where did this come from? And then ask ourselves, what are we going to, what do we need? I mean, for our future, for our present teaching. And you see, what might be interesting about that is that the whole question in regarding music theory, my position, my point of view was to ask, are we just asking ourselves questions? Music theorists were asking themselves, let's say, at the beginning of the 20th century or at the end of the 19th centuries. And why are we asking these themes? I mean, to be interested in, like, let's say, a kind of universal concept of harmony, like this idea of Riemann, are these really the question we are asking ourselves today, and even in music education? And for me, the answer was quite clear. No.
That's really, I like that you painted a very broad picture there. And it's really interesting how it's not really so clear that many different things are connected together, politics and the culture. And then now I'm curious of your next step. How did you then do your research and find the older methods?
So, of course, I was then really getting, even with my research, into historical textbooks, of course. I mean, the printed one first. And I do have quite a collection of historical treatises, very beautiful ones. It was one of my hobbies, you could say. One of I like to collect. I'm a passionate about old books, and I do have my collection. So,
can I jump in and ask a really quick question that came to mind? Did we lose a lot of treatises in World War II when Germany was being bombed?
Yes, of course. I mean, just of course, we lost. I mean, not in the sense, or rarely in the sense that every volume or every single print is lost. That I wouldn't say. But take the example of my first university where I've been a full professor in Dresden. I mean, this library was completely destroyed, completely. Nothing left, everything burned. I mean, this is really, if you see from the conservatory, this is really a pity.
What was inside that library of note?
Well, I mean, it was the Royal Conservatory, and I couldn't tell you in detail what was in it, but that what you are expected to find in it. I mean, all these classical printed treatises, and of course, quite a lot, which is really. I would say the real pity of losing things was certainly the written documents, the collections of professors of music theory. Quite a lot of these things are still there for Leipzig. But for Dresden, as far as I can see, I've looked what was left into the archives. There was not much.
That's a shame. So you mentioned you were collecting a lot of.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we come to the history. So it was in 2003 when there's an antiquarian in Munich, which is Katzbichler. And we had quite good contact because very often I just bought books there. And well, even don't remember which book it was. But when I was buying is because he knew that I was so much interested in all books. He asked me, so he said, well, look, I do have quite a collection here of books. One is Cherubini, Marche d'Harmonie, and the other one is the so-called, I don't know, Feneroli. When I said, well, what do you want for it? And I mean, he just took, I think, 200 marks or something, which is completely ridiculous. because it was a first prick, because he did not know what it was. And I said, well, put it into it. And I quite remember. So I got the book and I looked at it and I saw the Marche d'Harmonie and I was really thrilled at the first point. I thought, my God, what is this about? And then I took over the Feneroli, and then was completely. I remember I just read the whole night.
Is that like the Regole? Is that what it was?
That is really. It's like the Feneroli. It was really the like you said, the Regole de l'octave. It was exactly, in some sense, what I was looking for. I always thought, yes, that's the way they thought. that's how it worked out. That's how it's done.
What date manuscript was that? Was that like 1775 or was it the
No, it was the I really don't remember, but it was this famous two language, this Italian French print, which dates from the beginning, I think, of the 19th century, which was beautiful. But the Cherubini, which was first print, which really beautiful. But it was I read through it, and I read it again and again, and at the first moment I really had the idea, well, this is a theory. This is a different kind of seeing harmony, of understanding. And I must say then, at the moment I changed university when I came to Freiburg, and I was offered to take over this music theory at the piano, which was a kind of, let's say, it was when I came changing there, this was something no one wanted to do. And really, music theory at the piano.
Why didn't they want to teach that?
It has the reputation of not really being theoretical, something which is, you're doing playing cadences and things with a theory, bad students having there and so on and so forth. But I thought, well, that's exactly what I need. It's exactly what I need for this kind of, and they were really thrilled, because when I came there from Dresden, they say, "Wow, you really want to do that?" I said, "Yes, I really like to do that," because that was the beginning. Then I was really doing it from 2005 on to do it in a completely different way. And then I had the first generation of students, and I quite remember when Felix Tiergarten was my student in Dresden, and I did not teach that way in Dresden. It was when I left Dresden, it was just the weeks before that I really discovered these treatises. I quite remember when I came to Freiburg, I really started with Partimento.
Well, I have a question, Professor Holtmeier. Now, the Regole is not complete. How did you fill in the gaps of missing links in the rules?
I quite remember when I did my first talk at the Society of the German Society of Music Theory in 2006, which was, I think, in Weimar. I hope I'm correct. When I was presenting these things, I quite remember a very, very good colleague of mine and a very bright colleague of mine who said, "Well, but what do you want, Ludwig? This is just thorough bass." And I said, no, for me, this is a kind of theory, because, it's a theory that has an idea of let's say, of génération, as the French would say. That means of the generation of chords. It has a theory of harmonic progression, and it has a notion of harmonic space. So not different from any theory you do have. So what it is not, certainly, is a kind of holistic system. It's not what you could see. It's a complete difference from GTTM, from a generative theory of total music. It's exactly not that. It corresponds rather to that what critiques of Chomsky would say today, that we learn language in a quite different way. It's a kind of building bricks that you get, but nonetheless, you have to see this is it is a theory. What is the greatest difference theory of if you compare nearly any theory of the 18th century to holistic theories of the 19th century, is that they are so, I put it popular all over the place, that they are so completely not logical in a sense. For example, if you want to understand, I mean, that's what I say at the same time, for example, if you really want to understand one of the perhaps most complicated and difficult music theoretical text of the 18th century, the Code de Musique of Rameau, I mean, you really can, you're able to understand this kind of text if you understand that he's always shifting between the idea of chord in the sense of the trias harmonica. At the same time, he's switching one times of chord in the sense of the regole dell'ottava. Then he's switching to a sense of chord in the sense of a contrapuntal sense. And then he's again to what he calls face. I mean, to the griff. That means to the haptic moment of the putting the hands into to the chord. I have written an article about these 3 or let's say 4 different kinds of understanding chords in the 18th century. And what's so difficult?
Now you mentioned Rameau, and that is a great step. Now that's interesting because you wrote a book called Rameau's Long Shadow: Studies on German Music Theory of the 18th Century, and you released that in 2017. Let's talk about Jean-Philippe Rameau, a hugely influential music theorist. Do people, do they understand his theories correctly? Is he being misinterpreted?
No, I think we all know that he was nearly never really understood. I mean, that was even in his times, even you could see that's what Thomas Christensen said in years ago in his really fundamental studies. He was never really understood. That's true. He was, at least, what is so funny about it, if you ask myself, of course, this is a very personal kind of evaluation, but at least if you see that mostly even in the French reception, he is misunderstood, and by quite a lot of reasons. But he was, I think, one of the most prolific and most educated readers of Rameau's theory. Certainly was Marburg. And he was really someone who quite understood a lot of these things, but at least he was not sharing the ideals of Rameau. So the way he put Rameau into German reception, that's what my book is about, it's one part of what this book is about, was really had a certain, let's say, political, music theoretical function. So he was functionalizing Rameau for his own purposes, but his own theory was not really understood. But it's extremely difficult to understand. I mean, we still have to say.
What are people getting wrong? So is there not a fundamental base in a chord?
Well, there are some of the very well-known things that I think they're really they're really difficult. First of all, I would say people are very much concentrating on his first book, on In Traité de l'Harmonie. But you have to say that beginning even from the Nouveau Traité de l'Harmonie, but at least beginning with the dissertation, the late or the mature music theory of Rameau is quite different from his beginnings in the Traité de l'Harmonie.
Wow.
And that certainly makes it quite difficult. That's perhaps one thing we have to see, and I think we can quite a lot of scholars agreeing perhaps on this. Then I would say one point of the reception, which is very different in the different countries, is that you can see that for the music theorists and the musicians of the time, the most important books of Rameau were books 3 and 4. I mean, all these books where he's really telling about the Regole dell'ottava, about the La Suite des Septièmes. I mean, about these playing of let's say the practical part, the compositional, the practical part of his theory. But the German reception very much, and it's still true, I would say, for the French reception, is very much concentrating on book 1 and 2 about a generation. But there's a certain point in the Traité de l'Harmonie and later on in later writings where Rameau really says, well, you see, these questions about the génération des accords, génération, etc., they are not really relevant for what we do in practical music.
Oh my goodness! Does he really say that? Oh my!
He does.
Wow.
Well, but look, he comes from a music theoretical tradition, writing in books, well, like Salino, like others, where these parts are very much separated. I mean, you have to see this separation. So, for example, vous voyez, je remonte en français. I'm falling into French when I'm talking about. But look, if he's really going, for example, into the génération, in the generation of the sound, where does it come from? Where's our tonal system coming from, etc. He's talking about les sons fondamentaux, which is bringing up a generational, the ODD thing we all know. There is the tonic, and the tonic is creating the dominant and the subdominant, and then we have the scale, etc., etc. But this certainly is not what the marche fondamentale for the practical music is about. These are these are completely different things. And not only in reception, but in the whole music theory, this question of fifth progression, of what the cause of the generation are, these questions, I would say, these historical question of what people are dealing with in the first volume, they took over and they were brought in some sense into the practical into the practical part. But for Rameau, these things are quite separate. This is génération. This is règle de l'octave, counterpoint. This is les faces. Alors we call la mécanique des doigts, the mechanic of the fingers. So the haptical part, which he is pro. But these are two different parts, and every part has, if you can see, a very explicit, a very special notion of chord. The haptic chord is different from the trias harmonica chord, which stems in some sense from the génération. Very different from the notion of chord in the Regole dell'ottava.
Very interesting. Now, let me ask you a question. How do you integrate Partimento theory into the modern day curriculum, like at the Hochschule for Musik Freiburg?
Well, first of all, I mean, we just do a lot. I mean, it's not very difficult from what people do in Basel or in different places. I mean, we do have our exercises. If you do a Partimento course, you're very much learning with these things. I mean, an important part are playing the exercises of Förster for the first year, 2 year students. I mean, it's quite a time ago that I did these things. I will very often see that my students are very, very refining and working on these methods. But we do a lot of these improvisation exercises. I mean, introduction, Regole dell'ottava, then doing a lot of the sequential models. I mean, schemata, etc., etc. So, I mean, I think not very different from what I do in Basel or in different places. What we did it for quite a time. I mean, it's not 20 years, but nearly 20 years. 50 years.
And this is it based around Feneroli, or do you use other teachers as well?
Very much as other teachers, even going into late Romantic, taking from Louis Tuile, taking from Cornelius, taking from Forno. So we do really make Scalati. We make from this fantastic choice we have by a lot of work of a lot of fantastic scholars. This is really changing, and we're looking for the best exercises we can find, best in the sense of most pedagogically fit for the purpose.
Do most of your students come to you knowing nothing about Partimento?
Yeah, at the beginning, yes. It depends. If, of course, nowadays you must see I changed to the management, but I would say in the last years where I took students, or I still take doctoral students, I mean, these are very well informed. And today, what you can realize, if you take master's students, for example, and they come from Basel, they come from Bern, they come from different school, they know, of course. It's not common everywhere, of course, you can't say, but the certain centers that you have there, it's quite well known.
Feneroli mentions using books 1, 2, 3. Is that something you use? What are you mentioned best exercises? Can you give some examples?
Well, the examples I was taking very much were examples of the first book of Feneroli, of course, very much, and beginning with thorough bass without numbers. And then very much I was beginning with doing the which is very important. As I told you, I was really working at the beginning of my career. I was really working to the first book of Förster, which I think still is one of the most fantastic pedagogical works done in the 19th century. I don't know if you know them. The beste Lage. I mean, where to learn how to.
Tell me about them.
Well, these were the exercises of Förster, which I think is perhaps for me one of the best examples of pure Viennese style. And what's so special about him is that he's putting in a very strict idea of the functionality of chords. At the same time, he's connecting this very much to what he calls the beste Lage. That means the best position. So what the upper voice has to do, what's a question of voice leading, in this combination of chordal and harmonic organization in relation to the voice leading of the upper voice is what his whole work is about. And this is just fantastic to tell people that to make a good melody, you do have to make a thorough analysis, because what he does very well, as you can find also in the exercises of Handel, you look at a bass line and you don't understand the form at the first sight. You think what's about. So what you do, you're modeling, you're giving a structure to this bass line by a certain voice leading in the upper voice, and this is what this work is about. I mean, it's a fantastic introduction into, first of all, into the theory of Arabic numerals at one time, and at the same time of an introduction about relation of voice leading and harmonic progression and bass line.
Are there things you don't teach at the university? Like, for instance, you were raised in a very strict Riemannian style. Are there things you don't teach that other conservatories would normally teach?
Well, I mean, we do have to make the difference. If I do teach, for example, let's say students, violin, piano, I mean, basic harmony, if you do these exercises, this is quite different from what we do with our music theorist, I mean, which is clear. There, of course, you have to concentrate. There, for example, I certainly do a certain introduction into functional theory, but just an introduction. I then move really mainly to Arabic and Roman numerals. So what I don't do anymore, because I mean, you can do it, but you see, for the normal students, what they want from music theory, and how you can get them to like music theory, is when they, and that's, you see, where I come from as a pianist, is when they have the feeling, wow, this kind of seeing music really helps me memorizing, helps me understanding, helps me to understand broader structures. This is where you get the students. And then if a student comes and said, you see, Mr. Holtmeier, I'm much more interested in to know more, and then he goes perhaps into a minor or even a major in music theory, then it's quite different, because there we have history of music theory, and then you have to do your Schenker, you have to do your Riemann, you have to do New Riemannian, I mean, as in every, I would say, every responsible teaching.
Can I ask you, how do you, because you're also an expert in Partimento, how do you balance, because they seem to be pedagogically quite different, do you want to offer different perspectives on analysis, so you want to offer it all? Do you feel it's good to offer everything?
I understand if you talk about Formenlehre, for example, it's clear that my student, let's say, of the music theorist students, of course, they should know the Habakovsky of Kaplan and so on. I mean, the classical music theory, and that's kind of you see, professional music theorists must be bilingual, trilingual. in any way, this is completely clear analytically. At least, we have a lot of students coming from different traditions. But for an analysis, what we try very much, I mean, I have written once a time ago an article about Arabic numerals and about about, that's very much what I do, very much. I mean, in working, and I developed a way of using Arabic numerals even for late Romantic music. So we're still these, because I think it's the best way to tell what I want to tell.
Well, let me ask you this, Professor Holtmeier. You're an expert on Wagner, and you personally, not the curriculum, how do you analyze that kind of music? How do you look at something by Wagner?
Well, look, I mean, Wagner is a fantastic example for the reach, you can see the outreach of Arabic numerals in the sense of the dominance of a thinking in the scale. Scala's thinking. That is really quite true for Wagner, still it is. I very often, when I do quite analysis, I very often tell people, look, if you take, for example, even if you go into the Tristan, I mean, Johannes Menke has done marvelous analysis about this too. And you go into the bass line and you can see, look, this bass line has a quite clear tonality. I mean, it's easy. If you take it as a Partimento, you would do that way. And then you can see that there are some, let's say, wrong chords on these steps. Or let's say there are some wrong steps with the chords. But this is quite a way they do it. But at least the stability of the tonality is still given. At least you could say, well, even if it does this incredible thing, at least if you have a stable tonality in a bass line in Wagner, in most of the parts, you can really guess that at the end he will return exactly to this kind of tonality. So this is fascinating to describe. And for example, when he's using a certain scale degree, and then you remark that he's doing, well, it should be a 6th scale degree, but at least he says, no, I put a harmonies of a 3rd scale degree on it, and so on. I mean, that's certainly the way he's working, and that makes things very clear. Why? Because it really corresponds to the feeling we do have when we hear the music of Wagner. That means that we, in some sense, we can see all these colors, these opening windows and doors towards new landscapes, harmonic landscapes. But at the same time, we still have the feeling is very much grounded. I mean, it's just like a shifting into a certain view, but you don't have the feeling that the complete harmonic backbone is lost. Not at all. But it still is. This is for that. I like it very much. You
mentioned Arabic numerals. Just so I know I'm not mistranslating it. Is that, are you talking, this is not general bass, right?
No, it's what Bob Göttingen, what a lot of even what you find in the sources, what Förster does. I mean, the way Förster is describing his scale, so he's not doing on a 1st scale degree, he would say he's marking a 1, and this is the fantastic relation that he puts when he puts an Arabic 1 under degree. This is the 1st scale that degree, but at the same time there is let's say a certain family of chords that belong to that. So this is putting Arabic numerals
I see. Underneath. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Since we're talking about different theories, what is your perspective of Riemann? Can you just tell me your perspective, what you think? You studied him very thoroughly, and now you're a very experienced professor. Are there things that are good, things that are bad? I'd love to hear your take, just a few thoughts on Riemann.
I'm really tempted to take the move to say it's such a long time ago when I did these things. But when I did this very long article in the Riemann Handbook, which was a pleasure for me to do. But honestly, I must say I was very much interested in Riemann always as a historian of music theory, because it's such a amazing complexity, even if it's from time to time I have to say it's completely crazy, but it's so it's so completely amazing to see what he does. Well, there are 2 points. First of all, the question is, what are we dealing with when we talk about Riemann? First of all, Riemann has formulated and written a theory, let's say the what we call the popular, at least for the German, I'm not talking about neo-Riemannian theory now, which is quite different topic. But if you talk about the German Romanian heritage, you would say this is the practical Romanian theory, which is already quite popular, quite leaving behind his dualistic beginnings from the Practical Harmony, first published in English in, I think, I don't remember quite well, 1996, and then 1896, of course, and then it continued. And the question there still is for me, he was formulating this kind, and even in the großen Kompositionslehre, his analysis, when this music was historical. So first of all, as a historian, I would say, well, that's very interesting what Riemann does, but he does a kind of Beethoven analysis that is quite far away from the way, at least in material. In a material sense, people and a pedagogical sense, people were trained and thought about music. That's a certain distance, you have to say. I mean, there are rare, incredible observations of Riemann in his beautiful writing about music, which are just wonderful. But this is a point where I stand, where I can regard these things and ask myself, where do I find it? And it's very difficult for me. For example, I have done some research. There's this great research years ago from Sievers about Regole being a pupil, a student of Riemann. And this was the opinion that Riemann was incredibly influential in these uncertain composers. What we know today is that all these composers of the late 19th century, they grew up in quite stable and quite different, you could say, compositional environments where quite old traditions were with it. So the importance of Riemann there is quite limited. The importance of Riemann is incredibly in the reception of Wilhelm Mahler and Grabner in this kind of popular way for the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s up, well, where we began in its popularized form. That's one idea. But to get back to the theories of Riemann, there is, in some sense, this very Rameau idea of progression as a kind of hopping from chord to chord. And this as for him, as he often says, a chord is let's say, an element of perception. So we hear a chord, then we go to another chord, and we have this kind of idea of hopping and going around, which is not so completely foreign to Rameau. That is true. But you see, what we can learn from the Partimento tradition is that we really don't hear like that. We don't hear in these kinds of hopping step by step by step. Perhaps we do from time to time, but what we do hear more, I think, in my experience, is that we hear certain patterns, certain models, that we go there, sometimes we go back, and so forth. I mean, this idea of teaching which was quite dominant even in the thinking of putting harmonic exercises. So developing from chord to another, and if there is a gap between one, you really have to think, oh, what's happening there? What's going on? And this certainly creates a certain way, not only of thinking, of musical thinking, but also an idea of, let's say, musical space. And I don't really think that this kind of space, and I won't say it's wrong. I just would say it's
different.
Not it's different, and it's certainly not true for all times.
Right. Now, can you jump? What about Heinrich Schenker? Schenker is incredibly popular. What are your thoughts on Schenker?
Well, I mean, I've written the long article in the MGG in the Musik in Geschichte und Gegenwart, which was a great pleasure for me, as not being a real Schenkerian, to do it from a historical point. I mean, Schenker, in some sense, of course, is amazing. What we have to say that he was certainly one of the most historical informed music theorists of his time, and he was certainly seeing quite a lot. I mean, concentration, as you call Philipp Emanuel Bach on this treatise, and having really deep insights into historical sources. But he had very few sources. That we still have to see. And he was developing this, I would say, very much like Riemann, with asking questions which I would consider, and I really don't want to confront the Schenkerians, but I mean, as a historical informed music theorist, someone teaching in Freiburg and who taught at a Schola Cantorum, it's clear that the question Riemann was asking, the Urlinie, the question of the whole of a holistic, of a generative character of music, is someone who came from the 18th century, 18e, so completely far away, where I would say, well, it's very interesting what you do there, and some of the insights and at least some of the ways of graphic representation are really fantastic, and we take them over, of course, too. But the whole approach certainly is far away from my reading of the 18th century.
Feneroli mentions in his pedagogy that if you wanted to learn counterpoint, you should learn Partimento's book 1 to 3, and then you're ready for the written counterpoint course. How do you teach counterpoint? What's your perspective on how someone should learn counterpoint? The best way, in your opinion?
Well, the best way, in my opinion, I even don't know if there's a best way. There's certain different best ways that you can do, but one of the best ways that we do, you certainly know it, to begin with improvised counterpoint, which really gives you an idea of that counterpoint is not a mathematical experiment that you do in counting together voices, but it's placing, is listening to something, and at the same time that the counterpoint, which was, well, you see, when I grew up, it was very much in the ideology of the behind everything of Grabner's Der lineare Satz. And this idea of complete linearity. And if you do improvised counterpoint, or if you do three-voice counterpoint on certain examples, what I like very much is, even when we do begin, is with two-voice writing and two-voice improvisation. And then later on, what I did very often is begin with five-voice right from the start, in a five-voice writing in the style of Palestrina and the offertorian. Because what you can learn there is to get away from this idea that linearity and harmonic are two things. Because if you organize if you begin with a kind of five-voice writing in Palestrina, you always have the feeling that you have a certain, let's say, a scaffold, a kind of contrapunctal scaffolding that is in the middle. And then you have those filling voices. We just have, let's say, a pure harmonic function at the same time. So you have, if you do a five-voice writing from the start, you know that a sort of harmonic architecture and a polyphonic, a counterpoint architecture just belong together. Yeah, that's quite different from how we learned.
Should harmony be separated from counterpoint? Should they be two separate subjects?
You can't separate them. At least if you, I mean, it's different. If you can't separate them in practice, but as disciplines, I do like to separate. We all do like to separate them, because you see, you have that has something to do with the institutional, with the institutions. If you do have, for example, 2 years of counterpoint, this is the moment where you can place the music of the 15th, of the 14th, of the 16th century, and it guarantees a certain place for this kind of music. So that's what I appreciate very much, because I think it's worth to learn this kind of music. It still is. So it's called counterpoint. But in this music, for example, what I do very much is writing a Burgundian chanson, and in this style, I mean, you have to deal with harmony from the start. You can't separate them in teaching, but perhaps as disciplines, it's not completely ridiculous to separate.
You published a book on Handel with solfeggi,
Yes.
bassi, and fugue. What are your thoughts on solfeggio? Do you have a preference for fixed do, movable do, or perhaps the 18th century hexachordal solfeggio?
Well, I must say, of course, for the 18th century solfeggio, but I have to say, I never went very much like Nick or others. I did not went so much into the solfeggio. I have two of my students who are doing doctoral researches on this topic, so I'm very interested. But when I were doing the solfeggi, and as we did it in our book, I mean, the solfeggi part was mostly done by Johannes Menke, while I did the thorough bass examples. And that was much more about the voice leading, about beste Lage, about the quality of intervals. So at least of a broader sense of voice leading, and at least what I think that it was the teaching school of, as we do it, as you can see when you have seen our book, it was at the same time also the kind of Formenlehre of the time, where you learn to work with forms and to give structures to the forms by the voice leading.
Music schema is a modern concept, and I'm very curious. It's very popular now, thanks to Professor Yerdigan. It wasn't a term, I guess, historically. So do you use music schema in your teaching also with Partimento?
Well, I mean, the schemata theory is of course in the heart of the. I mean, what was not historical, I would say, are the names. Of course, I mean, at least, and I have done and certainly, as you know, we have different views about the names, how we should teach him. And
what are the different views? So, like the Cocenza and that those different types of names, the Prinner.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, when you see, I was putting this in the introduction of my bass line examples, that, as you know, there's some names later on, like you can say the Montefonte, and you have Romanesca, and so. But all these modern notions, you have Romanesca for Bourdon, Carousel, as we call it, Passo Indietro, Leapfrog, Prinner, and so on. We would not find these ideas in the text of the 18th century. This is clear, but it's not a criticism. But very often you just can use, as the historical sources do, you can call it consecutive 7/6, very much. If you're a thorough bass player, you know these are just models that you know. It's a 4-3-9-8. It's or you take these Arabic numerals, which very much 5-4-5-6-7-3. What you 7-1 on. These are things you can find in the sources of Sorge. This is rather more what I use, but of course we use quite a lot of for different cadential models. We do have historical terms and so on. We do have some of them, and then at least you can describe them as quite a lot of my students or a lot of the colleagues from Basel describes it. You can see there's a step of a fourth and descent of a 3 and 4-3. This is very historical too. So there are historical descriptions, but we have these moderns. At least Robert is using quite a lot of these descriptions, but I think it's okay. It's completely clear from a psychological point of view. If you give these things names, it's easier to have them in mind. But if you're used to these kind of thorough bass, let's say that you have at least I would say 3 different models. You have these 7/6, 7/6, 5/3, 5/3, where you have the outer voices. Then you have the thorough bass. Just as I told 4-3-9-8, you exactly know what it is. It describes the model, and then you have these, let's say, Regole dell'ottava steps in the descriptions. You can use them, and you can use also, of course, the modern notion. But I think you can't say that the schemata is not part of the teaching of the time. Because, I mean, that's what Feneroli is doing. He's teaching and very systematically. And we have this kind of systematic teaching of progression, 5/6, 5/6, 7/6 from the 15th, 16th century onwards.
Can you talk about Heinechen and his importance in the 18th century?
I mean, if you want to have the perhaps music theorist who formulates, even for Italy and even for Germany, the most standard understanding of music theory and thoroughbass, or thoroughbass as music theory, of course, Heinechen is the most important treatise. I mean, besides, on a different way, as I always say, Georg Andreas Sorge, the Vorgemach der musikalischen Komposition, those two of them are the most important. So if you really want to understand, because it's so fascinating, if you compare it to the first edition, I think 1711, his first one, which is very, very German in some sense. And then he moved to Italy and he learned and he came back, and it's incredible. Perhaps the most important musical treatise of the 18th century.
Did he basically, because it seemed like the Italians didn't write down much, did he codify a lot of the Italian methods?
Because he, as you say, he was a trained lawyer. I mean, he did. He did. Yeah, you have to think there is a kind of if you could write a history of lawyers in music theory. I mean, you have Heinechen, then you have, in some sense, you have Weber, Gottfried Weber, and even Adolf Bernhard Marx and Schenker and so on. I mean, and so what did he do as a lawyer? He went, and as a good German, he went down there in Italy and he wrote everything down. I mean, he was codifying it. He was doing these things. So he was putting it in. He was putting it into words, and I think this is of course this is a fascinating.
Didn't Bach use Heinechen's treatise?
Yeah, he did. I mean, as you know, the research of Derek Remish, you know him, I think. You should know him. He has proved it. But it's known for a long time. You know, there has been this incredible work of Heimann, who has written about this years ago in the 70s, has done a dissertation of Bach and the importance. And Heinechen had shown how that everything that we thought about Kernberger, about theoretical insights. And this was an incredible story, because when I found out of this book, I read it and I thought, my God, how could he write this in the 70s? And so I tried to get into contact with him, and I called him in I think it was it was not Oldenburg. It was, I think so. I was in contact with him, and he said that it was at a time that Dahlhaus and Egerbrecht both told him that you can't do a career with that kind of research. So he changed to music pedagogy. And if you read this book, it's mind-blowing. It's really mind-blowing. Everything we do, quite a lot of these things are into it. It's amazing. It's really amazing. I mean, he in his book, he already said, well, you know, everything. If you really want to understand how they did, and even for Bach, even for the choral writing, just read Heinechen.
That is amazing. That's fantastic. Okay, wow. It's so fantastic how the theory all just coalesces, and it's all quite unified, I guess, in the 18th century in some ways.
Well, in some way it is absolutely true. In some way it is. I mean, and in some way it isn't. I mean, it is in some way that you can find a certain family of schemata, of a certain, let's say, a certain range of modeled and a certain range of harmonic, let's say, harmonic space. But what's so complicated is how these different levels of understanding, how they are developed in the different countries. You have this strong trios harmonica tradition in Germany. I mean, or in North Italy, you have this strong, let's say, full accompaniment in the French tradition. So you have this very developed idea of the haptic chord in the French tradition, which is much stronger than in others. And then you have this great tradition, even in Italy too, of the haptic, of adding notes. So the entrejeu, the playing together of these different levels, this is completely fascinating. And at least I think to understand that you have to move very often when you read treatises of the 18th century, suddenly he slips and you think, oh God, what the heck is he talking about? I don't understand a word. I mean, and then you realize he just switched on this level of talking about haptic chords. You see, he just swept on this level, but he didn't announce it. He wouldn't say, like in a good German 19th century treatise, he wouldn't say, well, you see, now I'm talking about, but he switches to it. And then suddenly Rameau is talking about the sons fondamentaux, not about the marche, and so on. And to develop a certain feeling for this switching of levels, this is, I think, the core ability you have to, in my opinion, to read treatises of the 18th century. And fascinating is to see that the 19th century could see in this only inconsistency. This is for them theoretical inconsistency. But what I love so much about 18th century music theory is that it can really shift and switch from one level to another. And it's so, once you understand it, you love it so much. And you know why? Because the elder I get and the more experience you get, you can see that certain experience need different levels and different perspectives because you can't unify them into a kind. Because if you look from a different angle, from a different perspective, you need different tools to understand. And that's something we can really learn from the 18th century. In this sense, I think, the 18th century is, for us today, much nearer than the 19th century. And you see, I believe this is one of the reasons why this is getting so popular.
All this Partimento and 18th century pedagogy, is that helpful to understand music like Rachmaninoff, Debussy, Ravel? Is that all connected in some way?
I would say from the start, yes, because not only in the research of Felix Diergaarden and others, I did a bit of it too. I mean, if you see the traditions, not only of the French Conservatory, of the Munich Conservatory in Courvoisier, in Louis, in Cornelius and so on, you can still see that this idea of teaching and thinking in partimenti and thinking in scales. Look, the way the Russian musicians, Rimsky-Korsakov, were taught. I mean, if we follow up, you will see in the next year there will come up a kind of perspective where you can see that these traditions, they will still vivid when perhaps the dominant new structures were already there. But I think for the professional teaching of musicians and composers, even for those Russian composers you named and others, was still relevant. I think so.
Every year, new parents are getting piano lessons for their children, music lessons. What is your advice for a parent whose children are going to learn music from the very beginning, and you have such great experience in improvisation and a different way of looking, 18th century, Partimento? What advice can you give to parents who want to start music for their children?
Well, exactly, to find a teacher who is implementing, who is introducing kind of improvisation and a kind of a traditional teaching. That means you can learn an easy piece of Johann Sebastian Bach, but you can show, look, this is that kind of model he's working with. Let's do an experiment. Let's take it as it. That's what I try to do with my son, to say, look what it's like. Can we do it in a different tone? Can we work with this? Do you have an idea to work with it? And just for the parents, if the kids are doing this, it's not because they're not practice. It's not practicing. They're doing exactly the thing they have to do if they really want to have an insightful music teaching.
Well, I would really like to thank you, Professor Holtmeier, for being on the show and sharing your expertise with me and my audience. I hope we can continue this conversation another time. And before we end, if people are interested in your research and your teaching, how can they reach you, your university, and contact you, maybe your faculty, about this different style of learning music?
Well, they can always go on the website of the Hochschule für Musik Freiburg. Well, I'm currently, of course, as a director, very much away from daily teaching, unfortunately, I have to say, but that's the job I do. But if they try to contact me via my office or even by my email that you can find on the website, I would be very glad and hope to find some new interesting opinions, and hope very much you enjoyed this talk.
Oh, I loved it, and it was fantastic. And I think it's wonderful the work that you and your colleagues do, and I love the research that you do. You're a real pioneer, and I just really want to express my admiration for the work that you do. I wish you were on for 2 hours, but what can we do?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Certainly, that's the déformation professionnelle. If you're in this position, you used to talk too much, but you asked so lovely questions. So I hope it was delightful.
Well, Professor Holtmeier, thank you, and have a great day.
You too. Thank you very much.